we have Michael Drobac. He represents the drone,
Small UAV
thank you, Small UAV Coalition. And that group basically represents most of the drone manufacturers. And he's also a lawyer at Aiken. We have Bob Corn-Revere from the Davis Wright law firm. He's a First Amendment specialist, and he also represents some clients in this area wanting to use drones, media companies. And we have Mike Cavender from RTDNA, which is the Radio, Television, Digital News Association. He's executive director. Again, Mike represents, I guess, primarily TV stations.
Well, really, all everybody wants to get into drones.
Okay.
Radio too.
We'll talk more about that. He's here from out of town, which is great. We have Harley Geiger from CDT. And CDT is a privacy/consumer public interest group. And I think your group has some concerns about the privacy implications of the drones.
We are a civil liberties and technology policy advocacy organization. We protect both privacy and free speech.
Okay. Great. And we have John Verdi from NTIA, which is part of the Commerce Department. NTIA is just at the early stages of what it calls, I think, a multi-stakeholder proceeding or process where it has solicited public comments from any interested parties. And then I guess we'll hold at least one public workshop, and the goal, actually, why don't you tell us what the goal of this process is?
Sure, so let me start off by saying super happy to be here. I am not speaking for NTIA, I'm not speaking for the Department of Commerce, I'm not speaking for the administration or the president. I'm speaking for me, except for the opinions that I borrowed from him to his excellent congressional testimony this morning. So congratulations, really good testimony, strong work. So that aside, I had to do that because it's on tape. I would have done it. I said, hey, I'm Verdi. We have been directed by the president to convene a multi-stakeholder engagement. That means bringing together industry, academics, advocates, technical experts, and others to try to make progress on important issues about privacy, transparency, and accountability in the U.S. space.
Okay, that absolutely works. And he's director of privacy initiatives, I think, John Verdi, is that right?
You're making me blush.
All right. Well, let's get started. Unfortunately, the Federal Aviation Administration, which is basically the other federal agency here, didn't want to send a panelist, but we'll, I think, address some of what they're doing. Let's start off by talking about the government's role in this. The FAA, of course, is going through its own rulemaking proceeding in addition to the NTIA process, which isn't exactly a rulemaking proceeding. Just open up to any panelists. Can we talk about what the expectations are for the FAA to finish its rulemaking, and also what the expectations are of this NTIA multi-stakeholder privacy and transparency drone? Anyone wants to start?
Have that Michael J. Wall over.
I'm excited, yeah, so I'm happy to start. Thank you again for having me. It's great to be here with some great people and enthusiasts of drones. I would say where we are in terms of the FAA's process is that the rulemaking will take quite some time. I think that we're looking probably at the earliest late 2016, if not into 2017. I would expect there to be some movement in Congress before. So I think we'll see some interim measures that we've seen with the Senators Hogan and Booker that introduced legislation that will be kind of the gap filler until the rule is handed down by the FAA. I would say that one of the things that I think we're going to be talking about is kind of how do you balance this incredible technology and the use cases that are abundant with some of the concerns that have been raised about both safety and privacy. And I think the answer is, and this is where it's great to have John certainly here and CDT because of the reasonable positions that are taken. I think what we have is, these are groups that support technology, so that the answer isn't from either the Department of Commerce or from, and I understand that John's speaking only for himself, but from the Department of Commerce, in my estimation, and CDT have both been very open-minded about technology. And so what the answer isn't the technology is bad, it's let's make sure we have some reasonable rules of the road such that that operators of drones are not going to be abusing the public trust. And that's obviously what we're doing as a small UAV coalition, and just to put a little bit of emphasis on who we are. we represent Google, Amazon, DJI, 3DR, Parrot, Airware, Drone Deploy, Intel. So you go through all of the main hardware and software and manufacturers of drones. They're amidst our membership. We have 25 members. They're all in the commercial or recreational space, so we have no defense or aerospace clients. And I would say that on NTIA, we've been lucky enough to have some occasions to bring in members to meet with John. The conversation has been one that I would say, and I described it earlier, as more sophisticated and also more engaging than typically happens, where companies profess to be in support of privacy and consumer protection, and maybe they are, maybe they're not. But this case, I would say, is unique in that I think companies are genuinely on the side of moving forward with some really forward-thinking privacy measures that are taking into account what technology is available. So rather than just have some labels and disclaimers, I think companies are saying we have the technology available to us to actually put it into the devices. And that's what we should be doing, is have a privacy answer that is technology. So we're looking forward to the NTIA process, and we're also very optimistic about what's happening for news gatherers. So we were up before the FUD appropriators, the clerk and the minority clerk, and they are going to be moving forward with language that would offer news gatherers pilot programs. So we know that the NAB was supportive of this, and the Pathfinder program at the FAA, which allows for some testing with CNN, with Precision Hawk, which is one of our members, and BNSF. They're really trying to explore beyond visual line of sight. They're really trying to explore what can be done within the line of sight, and they're trying to explore issues of the fact that the FAA currently says you cannot have any kind of operations on the commercial front if it's over people that are unassociated with the project. That's ludicrous. I mean, I think we can all agree that means you're never going to be using drones at all, because you're going to have, and even the FAA's own analytical study suggests that you're going to have, you're going to save lives on, for example, one area they said on cell tower inspections, but a lot of these cell towers are near roads and areas where people unassociated with the project will be. So they can't have it both ways. And I think the beauty of this is we have a very constructive dialogue with them. I don't think they're going to be the final word on this with the rule. And I do believe that all the folks here are coming up with reasonable kind of remarks. And I did watch with great interest today the testimony, which was great. I think that industry is going to be on the side of putting in very reasonable and productive privacy kind of guardrails.
Well, from our TVNA standpoint, we've been engaged with the FAA for, seems like half a lifetime, but it hasn't been quite that long in their process, but also recently filed, along with the NAB, extensive comments with your organization, the NTIA, relative to the privacy issues. And our members are exclusively electronic journalists and managers of electronic journalism organizations, primarily television, radio, and digital. And of course, our members across the board are looking for the opportunity to ultimately get these UAS in flight because of the tremendous advantage that they offer relative to news coverage. And we're quite convinced as an organization that managing the privacy concerns are, if not easily done, certainly well within the purview of the other kinds of privacy concerns our members deal with every day with other technologies. The fact of the matter is that UAS is just another news gathering technology, just one that hasn't been utilized yet. But it was no different when other technologies were developed and put into place by our members, and we will work appropriately with this one as well when the time comes.
Now, some folks mentioned legislation, and that might actually supplant the, I guess it's what's going to be on the privacy side, but it'll be on the deployment side in terms of the commercial use of drones. The legislation might actually supplant what the FAA is doing. So anyone here want to kind of talk about, maybe Harley, want to talk about the expectations for that, and kind of any takeaways from the hearing that you were testifying at today?
So my focus is privacy and the interplay between privacy and free expression. So I work on both privacy as it relates to government drones, but then also as it relates to commercial sector drones. And so when it comes to the FAA's rulemaking, I actually don't have a whole lot to say. I don't think that the FAA is a privacy regulator. I don't think it's in their mandate, and I think that pushing them to do it is sort of a waste of time. I think that if we see privacy regulations coming from an agency or from Congress, it's going to have to come through legislation. I don't think that anybody has a mandate right now. That being said, I think that there is a will in Congress to do something. I mean, it's perennially talked about. It is, the hearing today, this is in the House Oversight Committee, it was supposed to be just focused broadly on drones and commerce, but I mean, half the questions were about privacy. And because the truth is also that the privacy concerns have held back the industry. It's become a commercial problem for the industry. They realize that filling the sky with flying robots is, makes some people nervous. And that they do need to address some of these civil liberties issues before I think the industry gains public acceptance. In terms, though, of what Congress can do to regulate commercial drones with regard to privacy, it's limited. It's limited to the First Amendment. I'm sure that our First Amendment experts will absolutely see the same thing. I mean, you've got privacy torts, right? Common law torts that say you can't film people if it's highly offensive to a reasonable person or if they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Those standards are very squishy. They're going to shrink. And courts are very deferential to free expression. So what we have left, really, I think, is, for commercial regulation is going to be a code of conduct. And a code of conduct from industry may not necessarily be, it may not be a one-size-fits-all. A code of conduct for a delivery service may not be the same sort of code of conduct that a journalism organization has. I know that there are codes of ethics that are out there already. I think it's a good start. I think that they're incomplete. And I urge your organization to think about that very carefully, to get as specific as you can. Saying, well, if it's newsworthy, we'll keep it, doesn't mean anything anymore, right? I mean, everything is newsworthy. If you look at the Daily Mail online, there's an article today, I looked for specifically to make this comment, there's an article about Khloe Kardashian wearing a blonde wig, and doesn't she look pretty in her blonde wig? And if that counts as newsworthy, everything is going to count as newsworthy, and everyone's a journalist, and the reasonable expectation of privacy doesn't mean a whole lot, so what really do we have? So I urge you to get specific with a code of conduct.
I think
you will be defined, I think, by the worst of you.
I think on that point, an argument can be made on this point, which is, again, I'm not against the views that are being expressed here. I think the problem we have is that I haven't seen any real progress on privacy generally. So we are focusing on drone, and it's become a big issue. Let's focus on privacy. I actually don't think
the USA Freedom Act passed just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, of course. I'm saying that when you look at things like, the collection of data, consumer data, what's happening is that there are very few instances where one would suggest I'm more terrified of my mobile phone and of my desktop computer than I am of a drone.
So,
I just don't, and so to make the argument that somehow there's something uniquely invasive about a drone, I mean, I guess we can go there. I don't think the reason that the drone industry is going to be in trouble is because of privacy. It's going to be in trouble, for example, if there's not safety. Right. Privacy is something we're going to have to address, and the industry will. I think to separate a drone and say it's somehow a different position than a helicopter or a camera on a stick or anything like that. I mean, Senator Feinstein said that a drone was taking pictures of her, and then when she came to the window, it fell, and that's why. But the reality is it wasn't a drone. It was a remote controlled plane. It was Operation Pin. And the reality is that some of this is hysteria. So I think we should all have a thoughtful dialogue, but there's a question about news gathering which I can't answer, and I'm surprised that we haven't seen a case about it, is it a commercial endeavor? Does it have to be? So if I were CNN or ABC or one of those, I would say this is not for a business purpose, and I'd start operating. I wouldn't ask for permission, I'd ask for forgiveness, and I'd make this a big legal issue, because in my view, news gatherers right now have the right to operate without permission from the FAA with an exemption. The question is, how do they do that safely? And I know there's going to be some, let's get it going here, let's open the study. In my view, the technology isn't the problem here, and we're not, I don't think we should be focusing on drones and privacy. I think privacy is a major issue, which we all need to get behind for other reasons, but I don't think it's unique to drones.
So
Well, I agree there.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you, and also comments that you had made about how drones are just another technology, right? Drones reach a vantage point that nothing else does. But you've got your news helicopters, but drones are $100. These helicopters to run, I mean, you'll know the price is that much better than I know that it's very high. You know, you can link a drone, you can link a network of drones over a wide area and watch it on a long-term basis. You can outfit it with many other types of sensors. You can do this also with a manned flight, sure, but as a matter of scale, as a matter of cost, you're not going to be able to do it for as long or as frequently as you can with the drone. In addition, it is new for people, all right? I mean, you talk about your cell phone or about your PC, turn off your PC. PC's not tracking you anymore. Leave your cell phone at home, your cell phone's not tracking you anymore. You walk outside, and if there's a high-flying drone, how are you not going to be observed by that drone?
Well, if there's a news helicopter, same thing applies.
But what
If there's an ENG camera in the hands of
every
the
blogger is going to be
photographer.
able to buy a drone. Not every blogger is going to be able to buy a news helicopter.
But that should not be the determinant for whether there needs to be privacy legislation. First of all, I agree with you when you say that it's going to be very limited as to what can be legislated, because these are huge First Amendment issues. But it seems to me that the vast majority of journalists follow and adhere to basic standards of good practice, of codes of ethics. I mean, our comments cited multiple codes of ethics that are in existence right now, and that the majority of our members subscribe to in one organization or another, and that will continue to be the case. I just think that, and I agree with you, I think the hysteria that is created by one incident or one perceived incident, maybe is a better way to put it, we've got to be very careful not to overreact when it comes to those kinds of things.
I don't think that regulators are overreacting. So far, they haven't done.
I'm not suggesting they are overreacting.
It's also not legal on
Right.
commercial.
Well, that's correct. But we're also seeing, in terms of overreaction, we've seen state laws that regulate commercial use of drones, private use of drones. That's already done, right? And I question whether or not those would pass the First Amendment challenge, but it's happening. Okay, we've seen people try to shoot down drones. It happens regularly. 2 weeks ago, firefighters tried to take down a drone with a hose. And they
did. They succeeded.
It wasn't even over.
They knocked over the water.
Right.
In Oklahoma, there was a bill that would have removed civil liability from people that shoot down drones. It would, it doesn't touch the criminal statutes, but it would say you have civil immunity if you shoot down a drone on your private property, no matter how high up it is. And that passed the Oklahoma Senate Judiciary Committee.
So where are you going with this? Is what I'm wondering. Because like stupid bills and stupid laws exist. So are we saying because there are stupid bills and stupid laws, we should expand into more stupid bills and stupid laws?
I'm saying that the industry ought to react with strong privacy standards, and thus far they haven't.
I think, but well, that's what they have.
What do you consider a strong privacy standard?
So I think that a code of conduct that has reasonable limits on data collection, retention, and use, as well as a public registry with exceptions to that public registry for example, for investigative journalists who need to naturally work undercover. And in terms of the retention element, which I think is very important, I think that personally identifiable information that doesn't qualify as newsworthy in any way ought to be stripped out.
A person's face?
I think, well, that's a person identifiable piece of information. And you can block it and you can delete the footage.
I think it's fascinating that the conversation about drones in Washington begins with their dangers and how we can regulate them. It's also a conversation I think is very difficult to have without seeing what they're capable of. And so I brought along 3 very short clips indicating what drone journalism and use of drones is.
I did forget, thank you.
This is Raphael Kirker, the first person in the United States fined for using a drone for commercial purposes. Well,
wasn't
that's
applying
the
for
issue.
commercial operations.
Is this Charlottesville?
Yeah, this is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he was hired by University of Virginia Medical Center to do a promotional video. And as you'll see, there were a few things here that are a little reckless.
See, I can't think of anything, but this is awesome.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that is the thing. This is awesome. And it's also, you know, you can see what might happen here. Now, what's interesting is the FAA fined me $10,000 for doing this video. And it was mainly for reckless use of a drone. And this is interesting. One of the things they cited him for was flying in a reckless way so that pedestrians had to jump out of the way. Now, to me, this looks like this guy's trying to catch the drone, but, you know, maybe that's just me. But it does indicate that there are potential safety issues with drones, as the next video will indicate.
I want to ask Enrique Iglesias something.
And just in case it was too subtle for you last time, let's see it slow. But the other aspect of this is that their capabilities are awesome. For news gathering, this is in Nepal after the earthquake. You can see that they can go places and take footage that otherwise would be unavailable to journalists. There's footage from Fukushima in Japan as well, and from riots. So the capabilities are amazing, and rather than a recognition of those capabilities, you'll find that the policy discussion has focused so much on how we can put these things back into a box, or at least put them in a cage before they get widespread. Now, obviously, there are regulatory issues, and just because a journalist might use this doesn't mean it can be free from regulation. That's not what the First Amendment says. So, for example, journalists use cars. The fact that they use cars doesn't mean the First Amendment says that they don't have to have licenses to drive the cars. Aerial devices, unmanned aerial devices, present other issues that will require some kind of regulation. But the question is, how much flexibility does the government have to impose those regulations without impinging on those First Amendment values in the first place? Now, there are privacy issues. Part of that's dealt with by tort law. I think if you begin an amazing new technology and introduce it in a nationwide way, by starting with its potential dangers and what we need to regulate, as your first question, you'll come out with a very skewed answer. First Amendment law doesn't really answer a lot of these questions at this point. We're still struggling, by the way, with trying to define what is the First Amendment right to take photographs in public, let alone photographs from a drone. I'm working on one case right now that deals with the ability, under the First Amendment, what right is protected for taking pictures of the police in the public forum. There are other cases, other circuits have decided it so far. Some have said that there isn't a well-established right, others have not gotten to that point yet. One decision that just came out in March from the District of Connecticut actually did involve drone photography, where an employee of a police station happened on an accident scene, went to his car, got the drone out, flew it over the accident scene. The cops were not happy. They surrounded him, eventually took the drone, and then after the incident called the supervisor and said, "You will lose the goodwill of the police department if you don't sanction this guy." And so he was suspended. The court looked at this when a civil rights claim was brought afterwards and said that A, in the Second Circuit, there has not yet an established First Amendment right to take photographs of a police scene in a public setting. B, there's no established right to do so from a drone. However, C, there is a First Amendment protection to not have the police retaliate against you for engaging in these activities. So the part of the claim that's still alive is the claim that it was retaliation to call the station and demand that the board be sanctioned. So it's a developing area of First Amendment law. We're going to see, I suggest suggest quite a bit of litigation going forward, trying to decide just how far the government can go about impinging on the First Amendment. There are obvious interests that have to be balanced, but I think starting that conversation by saying, how can we regulate it, what are the dangers, is really approaching it from the opposite direction of where it should be.
I think adding to that point, just one thing that will fit into what the work that John's going to be doing is also that Senator Wyden, who's been a major advocate for technology, introduced a bill yesterday, I believe it was, today. The bill is, I think, it's technology neutral. It suggests that we have to have a keen perspective on kind of the government's use of drones. But again, it's not saying drones only. It's saying, vehicles, aerial vehicles generally should be looked at in terms of what kind of process it should be gone through by the government to use this information against citizens. So I think that's an interesting first step. The fact that this technology is great, and I think it will play into how companies address this, as they manufacture new devices, and as we get closer to a point where this is operational. I would say that if you look outside the United States, there is a lot more happening commercially. There are companies that are operating beyond visual line of sight in France, and so we're seeing that the United States is actually considerably behind other countries in terms of the utilization of them. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that we have to speed up. I'm just saying that it may be that when we do, we will have ceded much of the advancement and economic benefits from the use of these commercially to other nations.
And real quick on the technology neutral point. First of all, we support Senator Wyden's bill. We worked with the staff on it. The fact that it applies to both manned and unmanned flight was in part a result of the recent disclosures about government aerial surveillance with manned flights, which helped bring this issue to the fore. We are not just in favor of privacy controls on unmanned aerial vehicles simply because they're unmanned, right? And we would certainly be in favor, as with Senator Wyden's bill, of reasonable controls also on manned flights. So, to the code of conduct, it does not necessarily just need to apply to unmanned aerial vehicles, it can also apply to manned flights. But we also recognize some differences, and we don't think that for our support it is necessary to apply to both manned and unmanned flights.
So I will respectfully disagree that Washington's first instinct was to put it back in the box. The FAA has disclaimed responsibility for regulating privacy in space. There is not a live bill in Congress right now that is going to get out of committee, that is going to go to the floor, and is going to pass the House, that is going to regulate commercial operation from a privacy perspective. Okay? The President issued a presidential memorandum, effectively the same as an executive order by a different name, in February. First thing in that presidential memorandum acknowledges the benefits of UAS to the government, to the broader economy, the American people. Okay? The vast majority of that presidential memorandum, 90 to 95%, addresses government use of this technology. And I don't think anybody in this room would argue that the government getting its house in order to operate this technology in a beneficial way, in a way that respects free speech, in a way that respects civil rights, and in a way that respects civil liberties, is impinging on the private sector. Right? And finally, the presidential memorandum directs NTIA to convene a voluntary process, not a rulemaking, to bring industry and others together to create best practices that would build trust in this technology so that Americans can enjoy the benefits of it. The president could have called for legislation. The president could have floated a bill. The president could have gone to executive agencies and said, what regulatory authority do you have to make rules in this space? He didn't do it. So I disagree with the premise.
Well, apart from talking about what the FAA hasn't done, which is a lot, there are things that it has done, which the first impulse was to find ways to regulate this technology. The Perker fine, no on privacy.
Okay.
The Perker fine was one example of that. But it also sent out cease and desist letters. It closed down 2 journalism school programs that were experimenting with the use of drones. It sent cease and desist letters to newspapers that had gotten footage from hobbyists saying, we need to have our lawyers look at this before we can allow you to use this footage. Now, since then, this last May, the FAA did send a memo or release a memo, saying that if you happen to get the footage from a hobbyist, you can use it. How it's used isn't our problem. But it does create an anomaly in the law where you have footage out there. Hobbyists can use drones in an unlicensed way. If they happen to take video, they can sell it to a news organization. The news organization can use it. But if they intended to sell it, then they can't do that because then it's an intentionally commercial use.
Right.
Commercial companies, media organizations, can't do the same thing. So we have this odd situation under the First Amendment where if you accidentally get footage, you can use it. If you stumble over it, if someone drops it through your transom, you can use it. But if you intend to get the video and use it for news gathering, then the FAA will fine you. So it's not like we've done nothing.
Well, this is where I think we're, in many ways, what John and what Harley and others are saying, we're all on the same, to some extent, what we're saying, agreeing on one thing, which is that we believe there are benefits, and I think John's point about the executive order, it wasn't an executive order, presidential memorandum, I think was excellent, because it did tout the benefits of this technology. I do think the FAA has also touted the benefits of economic analysis, and historically CDT has been a very leading organization in balancing technology with consumer protection. So I don't think anyone is saying there can't be reasonable protections. It's, of course, it has to be the balance, and I think that's what CDT does so well.
And everybody that has introduced drone legislation, every hearing, it all starts the same. The testimony of privacy advocates on drone hearings all starts the same and talks about the benefits of this technology. You know, the question is not whether we can put it back in the box, it's whether we can do it safely with respect to people's privacy.
And I would not allege at all that the multi-stakeholder engagement that industry and others are going to work on is going to be easy. Because I think there are genuinely tough questions about best practices in this area. But I also think that based on the comments we received, the thoughtful comments from the organization, from the V Coalition, from the journalists, the National Journalists Coalition, these comments were very thoughtful. The comments of the Amusement Park Association of America were very thoughtful. The Iowa corn growers had thoughtful comments. We got a diversity of comments across the board from individual American citizens who engaged on these issues in a fairly sophisticated way. I do have faith in individuals and organizations coming together with the intent of building trust in this technology and unlocking the potential of this technology. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think it's completely plausible.
I would agree with that.
I would as well. I think it's absolutely something that the members of the 2080 Coalition have been saying, which is there's a willingness to look at how technology can actually be used to provide the privacy rights that, or to protect the privacy rights that consumers enjoy. I think that's going to be the crucial part, is how do we use use technology within the devices to create, certain protections for consumers. I think everyone, at least the people that I speak to, are very much in support of that. I have not seen the same kind of genuine response in other areas of the privacy discussion. I think some people engage in debate around privacy and privacy protections, and then they tend to not be supportive of it because it impacts their bottom line. I think in this case, the bottom line will be impacted if privacy rights aren't considered strenuously.
The interesting thing is the order in which these things get done. Being a veteran of many battles over how the technologies of the First Amendment work together, it seems like we make the greatest gains when the technology is out there and disseminated first, and then government has to find some way to figure out what they're going to do with it. The internet's a perfect example. If the FCC had been involved, as they are now, and in designing the internet, and had issued a notice and comment rulemaking proceeding for whether or not we were going to have this, and had a multi-stakeholder approach, we would still be waiting. And when we saw it, no one would understand the phone book of rules that we got. But instead, the net and the World Wide Web emerged. And then the first impulse of Congress was to censor it with the Communications Decency Act. I worked with CDT at the time to try and put a lid on that, and fortunately for the first time with the new communications technology, when the Supreme Court took a look at it, said, yeah, the First Amendment applies to this, and it does so as fully as for traditional media. But I don't think that would have happened if the order had been reversed, if the government had tried to decide how do we roll out this awesome new technology. And we'll decide how much free speech we're going to permit.
Well, I think
The same is true of smartphones.
I think we're in a great position with the U.S. because we're falling so far behind other nations. So I guess the point is that we are, as a country, so far behind what other nations are allowing in the commercial space with drones that actually we may have time to view what other nations are doing and what kind of structure they put around it because of how, in my view, inept we have been in embracing what other nations are already creating pathways to have as a big part of their economy. So we actually may have models to choose from, as we are doing already. I mean, we saw as part of the rulemaking, the FAA took from Canada, it looked at Germany, it looked at, and that's what lawmakers asked them to do. Lawmakers said to the FAA, you need to start looking at our northern border, you need to start looking across the pond, because the reality is, this is already happening in other countries. So it could be, and I think, the Europeans have always been extremely strong on privacy. I think what we could see is that the Europeans are going to come up with an answer, or at least proposals, far before the United States, because we're not even in a position now where we can operate commercially, even though for the same exact operation, I could have a Phantom 3 by DJI or a Solo by 3DR. I could go and operate it, take footage of a vineyard, for example, for fun. I could post that, and that would be legal. I could use the same video and do it for the vineyard, and that would be illegal. That doesn't make any sense. No one would suggest that the government has this right now. I think everyone would acknowledge that we are backwards and that we are actually thwarting technology. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't come up with a great solution to problems that could develop. I think there's a good process.
Although here we're talking about safety, right? I mean, these are safety reasons that the FAA is holding back. And my understanding is that, part of what the FAA is trying to do, not that I'm trying to defend them necessarily, but this is just my understanding, is that part of what they're trying to do is ensure that there are certain safety technologies that are built into drones, right? Prior to allowing, for example, beyond visual line of sight or nighttime flying and other things. So for one example, they want drones to be able to sense and avoid other aircraft or other drones, so that you don't have a situation where the drone takes out an aircraft.
So when are they doing that research? I mean, I don't know. They're actually not, the problem is, everyone we've spoken to, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right, but also, but if you listen to the private sector talk about whether or not that technology is available, what I keep hearing, what I heard at the hearing today was, it's in the works. It's coming. It's in the works. It's coming. What they're not saying is it's here. It's already viable. It's already can be built into drones, and there is no problem. So what are we waiting for? Essentially, what it sounds like is that they're asking the FAA to allow drones to take to the sky before sense and avoid is actually ready for prime time. Which, from the FAA's perspective, in the most complex air system in the world, that's a huge safety issue. And when a plane goes down, they're the ones who are going to be liable.
Well, I think that the distinction you're making there between commercial operation is a false one, which is you can have commercial operation. You can have commercial operation, which isn't multiple drones in one small urban area. You can have ones that are. I mean, right now the argument that you can't go commercial for some purposes. Well, if that argument exists, and that's why the FAA is being so slow. Well, I'm saying commercial versus hobbyist, or generally. I mean, you have operations, commercial and recreational, taking place all over the world. We don't have that, right, in terms of commercial. So I think we could be further along than we are. I also think that the concept that this technology is not there, one of the problems we have, many of you may have been at CPA or Intel, demonstrated sense and avoid technology. So when people say, like, it's not here yet, it's not ready for prime time, the problem I have is that I witnessed it. Now, would it work outdoors? Well, one of the problems we have is it's not legal to test on private property. You've got to go to 1 to 6 test sites in the U.S. where some companies have anecdotally told us it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for 1 week of testing. So you're bringing your team, let's say from San Diego or Palo Alto to North Dakota, because that's where, and I love North Dakota, and Las Vegas and great places in this country. However, what's happening is those test sites are largely moribund because companies don't want to spend the money to send their entire teams out. They can't iterate at the test site. The test sites, there's anecdotal information that they're too expensive. Companies don't want to show the proprietary technology because it's not guarded. So you have these test sites, which, I mean, if you ask the test sites, they're flailing because companies don't want to do that. And companies are petitioning the FAA to actually do testing on their sites so that they can actually show that the technology does exist. If it doesn't work, I don't think any company is going to put up, thousands of drones in an urban area where they're going to be smashing into each other. That to me seems like a preposterous suggestion. I hope we're not actually
Just
saying.
interrupt, we have one question, let's go ahead, and then we'll get back to
Yeah,
Brian.
let's just jump back to the multi-stakeholder process for a second, and forgive my skepticism, but, privacy advocates just walk out of the facial recognition multi-stakeholder process. What makes this different? Because arguably there's a business case there as well.
The hysteria.
So I heard about this walkout. I heard about it because I was standing at the front of the room when it happened. Okay. I can make no guarantee that privacy advocates aren't going to walk out of a different process. I can make no guarantee that privacy advocates are going to show up to a particular process. Okay. We have a pretty smart privacy advocate right here. Harley can speak for himself. I'll tell you what I learned. I'll tell you that privacy advocates file comments in our open comment procedure. I'll tell you that advocates have told me that UAS and privacy is a critical issue for them. And I've heard from advocates and industry that they believe there's common ground to be able to move forward on these issues. Will they? I don't know. Future's unwritten. We don't have rulemaking authority. The benefit of NTIA convening this process is we do not have regulatory authority to decide, Mike, you're right and Harley's wrong. Right? It is up to the group to come together the way they did in the mobile app process that we ran a year and a half ago. It was very successful. And come to some consensus around important issues in which they have a mutual interest.
But I don't think that Harlan and I are going to disagree. This is the big difference, is I don't think we're actually going to disagree that there's a necessary framework that has to be in place, that has to be that industry. I will continue to say, I think there's a lot of hysteria. Senator Feinstein's comments were based in absurdity.
You're right.
But it doesn't mean the hysteria isn't true.
It's that.
This is what, but I'm saying, one of the reasons, I think you're right, everyone laughed when we said because of the hysteria. I think it's right. I think it's great. I think it's great that we're paying attention to this. I also think industry's perspective and the way, the conversations I've heard that are taking place have been, have been different than anything I've heard before. They've been, I think the industry understands there's going to be a necessary element on privacy and security that does not exist with some other technology. So I'm actually contradicting myself in some ways. I do believe that some of these manufacturers, software and hardware providers and accessory companies are saying, we recognize that there's a safety issue. That's the thing people talk about the most. Safety is definitely, anyone who says that privacy is a more important issue than safety, I think has got their priorities wrong. I think making sure that these can be safely operated and that they're not going to do damage to people and that people are aware of how to operate them is going to be crucial. The privacy piece is a part where we can make those together. So safety and privacy, I think, have to be taken very seriously. I don't think anyone, and I have heard the discussion, like what would make this different than anything else? I don't believe that a lot of companies that have been involved in privacy discussions actually want to see the ability for a reduction in the collection of information. I don't believe that that's taken, because data is so valuable. So the idea is that would a drone company, of course not my coalition, want to collect more data than less? Of course, because it's valuable. So we can't undermine or underestimate the extent to which some companies will go. But I would say that if we take on that perspective now, then we're going to have a pretty nasty fight in our hands, and I think we'll probably make no progress. Because the reality is the ability to stop something from moving forward is a lot easier than to get something going.
And I think, too, the privacy issues have to be taken in context. And I say this as someone who considers himself a privacy advocate. If the skies were filled with drones, like that car commercial that shows us a swarm filled then, yeah, I think it would be a very significant issue. But we live in a world since 9/11 where on every street corner we have cameras. They are everywhere. It's ubiquitous. There is no place you can go that isn't being recorded. Do we think that we're going to have the same level of surveillance with drones? I can't answer that question. I don't know. think is likely. And if that's the case, I think the other issues that drones raise, the other regulatory issues like the safety issues, the ones where you can actually see people being hit in the head by drones, those are the ones you should focus on first, and they're much more manageable than all the other issues.
This is something we can agree on. Even in this very room, we are being watched by a camera.
Well, you know,
I
my
should
hope-
add, I do support it, like Senator Pine said, a great deal.
You know, I certainly hope this multi-stakeholder process works and works well, because this is really the best hope at the moment for avoiding what will ultimately end up in 18 million court challenges if we start trying to legislate privacy aspects of drones. I mean, for me, this is deja vu all over again. I was having the same discussion not 2 weeks ago about police body cams and all of the privacy concerns that have been raised by some groups about what happens to the footage. You know, should the media even get access to the footage? You know, it should be described, but our position is that it's no different than dash cam video or any other kind of official police record, and yes, we should have access to it. But there's all kinds of hues and cries about privacy issues related to body cams. So, with every technology, you know, these issues are going to surface. They may be a little different here and there, but largely they're the same. Cameras and privacy.
And I think Senator Feinstein's point about the drone looking in her window, whether it was a drone or not, I think she's right. There are concerns that these will be, that drones will be operated in a way that is not sensitive to a consumer's expectation of privacy. And that is something I think we as a group, I hope, can agree that we have to be mindful of these things and work together to do something that will be enforceable.
And I think you're right, that these concerns do go back to the very beginning of these technologies. In fact, the original 1890 article by Brandeis and Moore on privacy was inspired largely by the development of portable cameras and the fact that those technologies could be used to invade people's privacy, take pictures of Samuel Warren's daughter at their wedding. And so that's where these issues came from. We did not set up a federal camera commission, but we did develop a body of common law, and in some states,
No pun intended there.
To define rights of privacy that could be enforced. And those, by the way, those same principles apply to drones.
Yeah.
So Harley,
I agree with everything that's been said, with two exceptions. One, that this is like any other technology. Again, I mean, we've seen in theaters of war, you can have one very sophisticated drone that has sensors that can watch 4 square miles at once. You don't really have that so much with CCTV on a single platform.
Let's separate out different issues of privacy. There's Fourth Amendment privacy, and when the government's conducting surveillance, and that is, I think, a much more serious issue.
I agree with you, and most of my advocacy has been focused on law enforcement use of UAS.
We probably agree completely.
Freeing of research, although it's certainly also not inconceivable that a commercial platform could do the same thing. And then the government would be able to get that footage. Right now, probably with only a subpoena in many jurisdictions, not even with a warrant. On body cams, yeah, there are new and different privacy concerns. Police raid my home, they're inside my home, if the media had access to that footage, I'd be concerned about that, right? If I go to the police and I tell the police, hey, I think that my neighbor is doing something illegal, I'm very concerned about it, I have a child, I don't want to be on camera when I do that, I don't want the media to have access to
But
that.
by the same token, when the police make a public record, shouldn't that be available through FOIA?
It generally is, although I think that when the public record is footage of the interior of an individual's home or somebody, somebody's face telling the police that, that giving them a crime tip, I think you start running into some safety issues.
But my point about that, well, I simply to say, we have the technology to mask this out or to delete that.
Sure.
Just like we can address the privacy issues about involving drones.
And that technology, I think, is very promising for something like a code of conduct, because as I said at the outset, I don't think that regulation is the answer for commercial drones. And on the multi-stakeholder process question, there are two things that could sink in. One, privacy advocates asking.
Only two?
Two big ones. Two
I
big
think
things.
that one back.
One, privacy advocates asking for too much, right? And finding themselves in a position where they say, well, you can't use a drone unless you get consent of everybody that you know, or something like that, right? Which I think is untenable. But then the second would be businesses and professional groups that say, we will accept no limits whatsoever. And I wasn't involved in the facial recognition multi-stakeholder process. I was involved in the walkout for somebody else at CDT that worked on that. My understanding was that it broke down on one of those two reasons.
I appreciate that, and I agree with you. I think those are the two broad ways that you don't get consensus in a group, is when you have polarized views, right? I will say, NTIA acts as a neutral facilitator in this. I don't weigh in one way or the other on folks. I do try to structure a process that helps folks get to a good consensus solution. I will observe that, the UAS issue, I think, is a real potential for collaboration. At the same time, it can generate strong opinions. It can generate strong language. And one of the bits of strong language that I sometimes hear when I'm in private meetings with folks is folks who come in and say, I don't know why UAS are being unfairly targeted. They're no different than any other technology. Why are you pointing the finger at me? Nothing needs to be done, right? And I don't think that that position is kind of the mainstream industry position, but I've heard it from some folks. And I've also heard on the advocacy side, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world, right? And I think that the more the reasonable mainstream folks who are thoughtful and sophisticated about these issues are vocal in the process, the more likely it is to succeed.
But what I'm hearing throughout this discussion is the theme that we need regulation because drones are a more powerful technology. They're just not like any other technology, so we really need to do something. And yet that same argument has been made in favor of regulating every powerful communications technology that has come along. It has been made for cinema, it was made for radio and television, by the way, it still holding sway in that area. It was made for the internet and continues to be made for the internet. And that whole question of how you define privacy, are we talking about protection from government surveillance, or are we talking about privacy that might be committed, violation that might be committed by some private person, some commercial entity? Those two issues are never kept completely discrete. We saw that in Illinois with their eavesdropping law, where they interpreted their right to privacy to protect against people being able to photograph or record police in a public setting, saying that unlike everybody else, the police had a reasonable expectation of privacy when they were out in public doing their job. Never mind that it might be beating the hell out of somebody. But, that was the way Illinois interpreted its law. It took a decision of the Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit to say, no, the First Amendment doesn't permit you to interpret the law that way. But it was done in the name of the right of privacy. So we have to be very careful when we try and use a civil liberties justification to restrict what otherwise is a right that is made available through a very powerful technology.
Let me just do.
To reiterate, we're not talking about direct regulation for commercial use, right? The direct regulation that we're talking about most frequently with regard to law enforcement use. And in terms of the reasonable expectation of privacy of people in public places, the Illinois case you just described would actually be very troubling to us. I mean, we absolutely support the right of individuals to take photographs and footage in public places. I mean, again, we are not just a privacy organization, we are also a free expression organization. And it's actually surprising to hear you talk about this. I thought that your right to film police in public was a lot more settled than it apparently is.
Actually,
I didn't know that.
it's still it's a work in progress.
In the First Circuit, yes.
The First Circuit has been the strongest, the 11th Circuit, the 9th Circuit, and now because of the Alvarez decision, the 7th Circuit. The Second Circuit, it's still kind of up in the air. The Third Circuit has said no, it's not a well-established right. And the Fourth Circuit has one unpublished decision that really says very little.
Are these privacy or safety grounds?
Basically just saying that it isn't recognized as a First Amendment right, even though its predicate comes in recognized rights that go back to the beginning of First Amendment law. The right to gather information, the right to report on official actions, the right to speak about things in the public domain. And yet, because a new technology is involved, and a powerful new technology, courts sometimes get a little bit confused, which is actually the history of applying First Amendment to new technologies. Courts are reluctant until it becomes mainstream.
I have a quick follow-up, then we go to an audience question. Harley, just to pin you down a little, it sounds like there's some optimism around the table among the panelists for this MDA process where others haven't necessarily succeeded. Do you share that optimism, or are you more cautious about the?
I do. I mean, we do joke about the hysteria, right? But it is true. I mean, there is a great deal of media attention about this. I do think that companies get this in a way that maybe was not present with other technologies, but it also depends on who comes to the table. I haven't participated yet in any of the multi-stakeholder processes, so I'm not really going to have much of a basis of comparison. But so far, the folks that I talked to are largely saying positive things. But we'll see how it works out when it comes down to the details.
Okay, go ahead, sir. In the
Okay,
audience.
well, you talked about how, you know, maybe a First Amendment right to use the technology in public, but what if you've got a drone that can peer into somebody's bedroom window or your locker room? I mean, you can't tap my phone, you can't use that technology.
Right, and that's already covered by existing common law, that even though there is a First Amendment right to take pictures of things in public, when you intrude on private space, then you've committed a tort. And now there are gray areas based on specific facts, and there was a decision just a couple of months ago in New York involving someone who was taking pictures of his neighbors through their windows, and whether or not he could produce fine art photographs and sell them on the baseline. Now, he was inspired by the Hitchcock film, Rear Window.
Flying art photographs. Nice,
Right. As it turns out, the Court of Appeals interpreted it as saying under New York statutory right of privacy that this was protected, that the photographer could do that, because after all, people have window blinds for a reason. So you can prevent that.
Was there any like crime going on like in Rear Window or no?
So the fine art photographs prevail.
Yeah.
All right, sir.
It was alluded to a few minutes ago, but I would like to know if anybody has a sense of where we are, both on the federal level and individual state level, for FOIA of government use of drones.
Actually, Mickey Osterreicher, who is general counsel of the National Press Photographers Association, is here. He may be best able to answer that. And there is state legislation on drones that limits police use. Now, in terms of
I'm talking about getting the footage.
Yeah, you're talking about public records.
Public records, and it probably has some application with the body camera
Well,
situation.
the body camera is really, at this point, in the forefront of that argument. Nobody's gotten to the drone footage part, though, and I'm sure that that's not far behind. We were just having, that was part of the discussion of the panel I was on this morning at the museum, where that's exactly what's happening with departments, is they're struggling with what their policy is going to be. In terms of, you know, what Harley said earlier, you live next door to somebody, there's a violent domestic, you have kids, police come, the policy of the department again is, and they have to set those policies, what situations do they record? And I think, you know, it's probably going to come down to, you record in all interactions with people on the street, they don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Come to their house, they might have that argument. So then the real issue now is redaction. How, if you FOIA that video because you're worried for your children that, you know, there's a problem there, but they came in the middle of the night and there's this violent domestic, except the two people involved are in various states of unrest, and the video shows that, the problem for police agencies is that they don't have either the technology or the money to actually, and they literally now for redactions have to go frame by frame by frame to redact that, and they don't have the ability to.
The legal standards, though, are established because there are exemptions in FOIA for release of information that would violate personal privacy, but it's the implementation of it that is difficult.
And so a lot of departments, again, I know you asked about drones, but we're not hearing that, are saying that they want to blanket exemption from FOIA of body cams, which kind of defeats the whole transparency purpose, but that's something, again, that they're going to have to struggle with and work with. And if somebody's going to mandate that they do that, then they're going to have to come up with the money for departments to A, have the storage for more than 30 days. Video takes up a lot of storage space. And you think about even a small department, forget about Washington or New York, where if every officer has one, and we only keep for 30 days, it's almost going to be impossible to store that. And then what you do with it when you get a FOIA request.
So it's likely that as we evolve through the body cameras, there'll be probably some principles that could apply to the drones.
Yeah, and I think that that's true in terms of some of the jurisprudence that we've seen involving aerial surveillance coming from either fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft is eventually going to trickle down to the police use, in terms of GPS tracking. I mean, some of the same decisions that we've seen from the Supreme Court are probably going to influence where we are in terms
Well,
of.
we're seeing the courts catch up with technology.
Yeah.
Like Riley versus California, which was the Supreme Court decision from last term, finally holding that if you see someone's cell phone incident to an arrest, you have to get a warrant before the police can search them. When the technologies advance much faster than the law does, and so sometimes if the law has not advanced enough, it can really impede the development of technology.
And I think the real problem is
Instantaneous photographs and newspaper enterprise have invaded the sacred precincts of private and domestic life, and numerous mechanical devices threaten to make good the prediction that what is whispered in the closet should be proclaimed from the housetops. The press is overstepping in every direction the obvious bounds of propriety and decency.
And, there was a time when the Browning came out that it was banned from beaches. There were big signs up, no cameras. And, people back then wore more to the beach than people now wear to church. But back then, it was, oh my God, the right to privacy as we know it is over. And we're just repeating it, but what I was starting to say is, back then the technology kind of moved like this, and the law moved like that, and eventually caught up. Now the technology moves at this exponential rate, and we've got a bureaucracy that's moving at a glacial pace, and the divide just keeps getting worse. So that's why I really think it's important to have these conversations so that we don't get in a place where it's a moot point, where everybody else is doing it and we're sitting around gnashing our teeth and wringing our hands.
And next time I'll host a conversation about private property rights, because that's another area where there's been some Supreme Court jurisprudence on this case, and there are people that suggest we're going to go back into a discussion of airspace and whether property owners have a right to the airspace above their home and how high that goes, which will be a big issue in the discussion of drones and how they're being used. So I think it's, there are a number of topics that are of great interest on this.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court case in Cosby, defended the opportunity for operators of aircrafts to go over private property. And so people are now saying that is the definitive word on drones, and we'll see.
Go ahead, sir.
I recognize that this is premature because you're at the beginning of this collaborative process, right? Let's say the process succeeds and there's guidelines and whatever. What happens when a rogue person doesn't follow the guidelines?
Well, have they signed up for the guidelines?
Well, I'm guessing what I'm asking, are they legally enforceable?
Only if signed up.
Yeah, well, exactly. So we're back to where we are now because there's going to be like a demand, maybe. We got to regulate because these are nice little guidelines you guys have, but anyone could,
Well, the truth is, I hear you, and often
I'm being overly cynical.
No, but often Congress is driven by anecdotes. I mean, there is history and privacy law of certain laws being passed even at the federal level based on anecdotes, right? So yeah, there is that risk. I do think that cooler heads in Congress look at this and say, well, you can pass a law and say, don't fly any manned aircraft near the Capitol. What happens? Some mailman decides that he's going to deliver a protest package in his gyrocopter. And they regulated the hell out of the National Capital Area airspace, and that didn't stop them.
Right.
So ultimately, all preemptive sort of criminalization or regulation is futile if you have a sufficiently motivated individual. But I do take the point. Anecdotes could drive regulation here. I think we need to make a good faith best effort to ensure that we're.
I think when that anecdote occurs, you're gonna wanna have that code in place.
Right.
Right.
Again, I'm not disagreeing with the process,
Yeah,
I'm
but-
just recognizing that.
Sure.
You're gonna wanna say, look, this guy's an outlier, we are being responsible, we have a code, we are following it. You know, no, there's not a need for regulation, this guy is an outlier.
And I'll answer,
Yeah.
go ahead.
The other point I want to make on this is that, you know, one of the things the FAA did suggest, I think it's of interest, is there will be knowledge test centers that will be, and this is in the rulemaking, where people can go to, you know, to learn how to operate drones successfully. The Noble Free Flight Campaign, which is an effort by the AMA, ABSI, and the Small UAV Coalition, is an effort for operators to learn how to fly. And I think what could be built into these knowledge test centers, as well as into what we're doing with the Noble Free Flight Campaign, is to have a program on privacy and have there be certifications that are, or certificates that are granted to those who operate. I think there is much more of an interest by what I see as the private sector on this, and even the commercial operators, non-governmental entities that are interested in getting this right.
Well, I'm gonna maybe to some extent contradict myself, but the White House drone, right, that then led to, I assume, some of your members saying, well, we'll
Yeah,
build into the hardware.
yeah, that's absolutely the case. And I think that.
So that there's some possibility of baking into the
It does.
technology
And I
some
think
restrictions.
the 10 mile, I mean, the 5 mile ban from an airport, the 10 to 15 mile ban on the Capitol, the Washington DC. To me, some of this is, again, I don't want to use the word hysteria because people love that word here, but I want to use the word that, but it depresses me that we put some of these in place, because I should be able to operate my Phantom 3 in the DC area somewhere. I shouldn't have to drive out to some, remote area in Maryland or Virginia to operate in an area that is clearly safe. That's just my view. Now, again, the problem is that we do have hooligans, and they're pointing to the White House situation as someone lost control of it. Mind you, it was a government employee who was inebriated. So, I mean, when I'm looking at that example, I'm thinking to myself, this is kind of a unique case. It's not that the person lost control of it, it's that the person was drunk and a government employee who should have known better. I mean, I'm not confused about what the White House lawn is. I'm not throwing anything over the gate because I'll get busted. The idea that this is an example of how drone operators are running afoul of common sense. To me, this is not a drone operator. This is someone who's just a fool, and that should not dictate how we proceed on the issue. However, there are people, there are uses that I think we should contemplate whether we put some guardrails in. And I think you're right. That I think industry is going to be supportive of it. I think industry, and we've seen it already, they don't want to put instructions in their boxes. They want to inform people about how to use them appropriately, because the last thing you want is your name on a drone that gets used in a way that will create a catastrophe. That's not something that you want.
Any more audience questions? Go ahead.
I think there are always going to be bad actors, and we have to agree on that. And as Bob said, I think we're kind of catering to the lowest denominator. People drive without insurance. People drive without driver's licenses. We don't ban cars. We deal with those situations. And now what we're seeing is, at the outset, we're basically saying, no use of drones until we figure it out. I mean, cars came along and
Because what if something bad happens?
yeah, what if something bad? As an example, in terms of the operation and the software, so the NPPA is part of this media law coalition that submitted comments to both the NPRM and the NTIA. Just yesterday, we were down at the Mid-Atlantic test site for the first time, spending 6 figures to be there because they're unfunded test sites. And we're doing training, and we gave the FAA protocols of what we wanted to test to be good partners. And are you interested in this data we're going to collect? Not tell us what to test, but this is what we're thinking of testing. Is this useful data? It took them from last July when we met with them, hammering away till this May, to say, well, by that time we had things in place. But what's interesting in terms of that software is one of the guys was describing driving down, and he wanted to check something on his DJI Phantom, and he was within the circumference of the no-fly zone. He didn't want to fly it. He went to just turn it on, and the thing lit up and said, sorry, you're within this, because it knew from GPS where he was. It wouldn't even let him turn it on.
Yeah, and one of the things that someone told John recently, one of my members, was that it's really hard to regulate jackassery. That was the term.
That's the thing.
And I just said, I never heard that term. It's a great technical term for what we're seeing in some technology.
Any other questions? Well, this has been a really good panel. I really appreciate the audience participation, all the people from SBJ coming out to help. I guess this will be on the internet later and available for replay. Thanks to all the panelists, everyone.
I know that I approve.